Welcome to Inspiring Women in Audit, the only podcast celebrating the achievements and journeys of women in the internal audit industry. In each episode, we spotlight the extraordinary stories, insights, and expertise of these dynamic professionals. Our aim is to amplify their voices, inspiring a new generation of women auditors to share their knowledge, experiences, and unique perspectives. Remember to check our show notes for links to our social media channels and to subscribe to the Inspiring Women in Audit newsletter. This podcast is brought to you by I4 Global Results Limited, the audit communication experts dedicated to transforming your audit reporting and your audit results through communication, optimization, and collaboration. Now, let's dive into this episode of Inspiring Women in Audit.
I'm excited today to have Richard Chambers as my guest on the Inspiring Women in Audit podcast. Richard is the founder and chief executive of Richard F. Chambers and Associates, LLC. He served as the president and CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors from 2009 to 2021 and is currently the senior advisor for risk and audit to the audit board. And this year, Richard is celebrating 50 years in the internal audit industry, which is amazing. So Richard, welcome to the podcast and congratulations on your storied career so far.
Well, thank you, Tracy. It's really an honor to be able to join you, and I've been admiring a lot of the work you've done, and so it's great to be a part of it.
Thank you. And I started the Inspiring Women in Audit podcast to provide a platform to amplify women's voices in the audit industry. I did the Audit Room as co-host with Trent Russell for 2 years, and what I found with that was always a little bit more of a challenge to get women to come on as guest speakers. And when we retired that 2 years ago this month, I was reflecting a lot on it, and that's when I launched the podcast in January 2024, because I want to create this space where women can openly, safely, supported, welcomed, share their unique perspectives, their experiences, their stories with the world. And so I really appreciate you being here to kind of amplify that message even more.
Well, like I said, my honor to be a part of this discussion.
And so we connected over the topic. We are on LinkedIn and we connected over the topic. And you've recently published an article about changes that we're seeing in audit leadership. And I'm wondering, there's obviously a lot of research that went behind that article. I'm wondering what your main takeaways from that research are.
Well, the research, in all fairness, the research really was from the IIA, their annual Pulse of Internal Audit report for North America. And they've been pretty courageous in the last 3 or 4 years by some of the questions they're asking, and it's allowing them to get the kind of demographic information that maybe we didn't get in the early years of the Pulse annual survey, which I launched when I first became the CEO there. And among the questions they ask questions about age, they ask questions about gender. And so what it's allowing them to do, and by extension, the rest of us who like to peruse their data, is to watch trends unfold right in front of our eyes. And one that's quite inspiring really is this whole gender balance trend. So the thing that struck me, and my article that I wrote about that's in Accounting Today, the latest edition of Accounting Today, or at least the latest online edition, was to talk about how reassuring in a world where there's so much negative disruption to see that there's actually some positive disruption going on too. And I talked about the fact in the first part of the article, I talked about the fact that demographically there's a passing of the torch underway from the older generations, particularly my generation, the baby boomers, to the younger generations, the millennials. And for the first time this year, in surveying CAEs, they were equal. There were an equal number of CAEs who were millennials as baby boomers. The majority still are Gen X. But the part of the data that I thought might be interesting to your listeners has to do with the gender balance and the fact that we're seeing a real shift there. Still, when you start to parse it by demographics, by generations, my generation, to the extent that we're still hanging around and can't seem to let go of those CAE posts, you'll still tend to see more boomer CAEs who are males. So 67% of the boomer CAEs are male and 33% female. But as you move through the subsequent generations, that balance becomes quite clear. In fact, the millennials, when they surveyed the millennials, that's those born between 1981 and 1996 who are CAEs, it's 50-50. And that's very promising as we look forward, because this is actually the generation that will be, again, metaphorically taking the torch forward. And so I think we have come to a much better place than we were for a long time. There's still a lot of other issues, as far as pay disparity and those kinds of things, and we really don't have the data for that. But instinctively, we know there's still some things that can be done there. But I was encouraged to see the fact that the newer generations, the younger generations, it's a much more balanced. There's much greater parity in gender representation.
And I'm seeing it in practice, to be honest. So I have the Inspiring Women in Audit LinkedIn group as well. We have now this week, we've hit 500 amazing inspiring women in audit in the group. And we do have a lot of female, I would say younger, like Gen X and millennials even, heads of audit, which is quite a new phenomenon. And I'm seeing across a lot of the clients that I work with, the turnover now, as some of the baby boomers move out, is we are getting more and more women who are taking over those roles. So I think it's fabulous.
Yeah,
I think it's
absolutely.
Fabulous. And yeah, and even Dominic Forschler, he has his audit challenge coming up, and we have a slot on his agenda for Inspiring Women in Audit to have a female panel to talk about audit strategy. So we're getting traction everywhere, and I think that's a good thing. But your article also talked about some of the pioneering women in audit. So we have Carmen LaPointe, Betty McPhillamy, Patty Miller, to name a few, Janitha John, who is frankly one of my heroes in the world of audit and leadership and getting out there and sharing her message. These women have all held high positions within the Institute of Internal Audit, which I think is amazing. What I'm wondering, though, is what we're doing outside the ecosystem of the Institute of Internal Audit to also raise and amplify women's voices and women CAEs. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think there's great opportunities to do that. Someone raised, and it may have even been you that raised a question recently about, I offer a recognition each year to those who are out there advocating for internal audit. And as I look back over the last 3 or 4 years, I think my Internal Audit Beacon Awards had been more fairly distributed. This year, I think of the 10 that were recognized, I think we only had 2 who were recognized. You were one of them. Very excited that we were able to do that. But I think the point is we need to use our voices, and it shouldn't matter what generation we're from. What gender we represent. It's about getting out there and advocating for the profession. And so in prior years, I think we had seen and heard much more during the evaluation period from women, and I'm hoping that maybe by virtue of this conversation today, we can re-inspire some of those who maybe found themselves preoccupied with some other challenges last year, to get out there in 2025. And I'm already seeing that, by the way. People like Ursula Schmidt and others are just out there making their voices literally heard. She's doing a great job with videos. I was just on stage last week with Janitha. You mentioned Janitha John. We were down in or over in Dubai on stage together. So there are plenty of voices being raised on behalf of our profession who are women.
There are, and I have to say, I love seeing all the women on stage. I was at one event recently. I'm not going to talk about who hosted the event. And I saw a post online about an event for panels. So the panel I saw in person and one panel was being announced. And it was, and don't get me wrong, I have nothing against men, but it was for men. And it strikes me so quickly now when I'm looking at things, on LinkedIn where we're all having conversations or when I'm at a conference, because we have so much more parity now. I still am not quite sure why we don't have more women on these panels.
Well, I don't know that I don't know that it's pervasive. I know that I chair several panels throughout the year, and I can't recall any time that I've chaired one in recent years that didn't have some diversity. I think the panel has to reflect the audience. It has to look like the audience, and if it doesn't, the audience will notice that, as you did, and then maybe the panel isn't quite as impactful. So you raise a good point. It's something that I think conference organizers and event organizers can always do a better job of. And it isn't just about gender. It's also about making sure that we have the right balance in terms of color, ethnicity,
Global.
Yeah.
It has to be global.
Age diversity. Yep, absolutely.
Yep, absolutely, all of it. And so when we had our initial conversation, you had said there were some women who've influenced your career. Did you want to introduce us to any of them?
I was thinking about that again as we were preparing for today, and it's sort of a bit parallel to my own story. I came into internal audit right out of college. I was barely 21. I think I was just turned 21 like a couple of months before, and I went into an internal audit role. And I don't know that it was as apparent to me right away, because I was in a bank at that time, and we did have young women not far removed from my age who were joining the internal audit function. But then I didn't stay very long in the banking industry. I moved into government and worked in the Department of Defense as an internal auditor. And there it was very obvious. I worked with a staff of 14 auditors, and all of them were men. I was the youngest, so if there was any diversity in the office, it was probably me, because I think the next older one was like 14 years older than me. So it was a much older group. So it was older, and to be quite honest, there was no ethnic diversity or racial diversity. So it was a group of quote unquote old white men. And so I think I began to understand over time just how this didn't look like the real world that I was living in outside of the office. And so you could imagine, about 3 years into my tenure there, my boss decided he was going to bring in one of our subsidiary organizations we had like 35 subsidiaries, and she was the only chief audit executive that was female. He decided to bring her into our team. And so everybody was, kind of,
What do we do
taken
now?
back. But, for me, it was incredibly helpful, because I had a chance to learn from her skills that I didn't learn from the guys, right? And she was, and I think she may still be living, actually, even though this was 50 years ago. I know she's retired and probably around 100 years old. The last time I talked to her 2 or 3 years ago, or communicated with her, she was still doing okay. But the point is, she sort of set the trend that I noticed as I worked with women over time, particularly back in that day where it was harder for them to break in and get ahead. And there were 3 characteristics that I noticed that she possessed that I think women who really are going to break in and break out share in common. They are competent, they're confident, and they're courageous. So there's the 3 C's, right? Competence is table stakes. You got to be absolutely competent, and some might argue you've got to be even more competent to be able to overcome those barriers. You've got to be confident in yourself, confident that you can stand right alongside anyone, no matter who they are or what their backstory may be. And then courageous. It takes courage in some cases to get in and get into that field of play. So I noticed that about her, and I learned a lot. She was probably the age of my parents, but I remember one story in particular. We were doing an audit in South America. It was probably around the time of the Panama Canal Treaty implementation. So I mean, I go way back, and she and I were there, and we'd found that the records that we were supposed to look at were not auditable. And she made that call and said, these records are not auditable. And I remember us being called in by this full colonel, very crusty old guy, and he was screaming at us, and he was screaming at her and said, you are unprofessional. You don't have any idea what you're doing. And I watched her, and I watched how she maintained her composure, and I watched how calm and cool and confident and collected she remained. And those were lessons that I have used for 50 years, right? So you learn from people regardless. But I think my early encounters in a field where there weren't a lot of women really helped me to become more confident over time. And I would go on to work for a female inspector general in the U.S. government, and she taught me so much about this whole topic of courage. And we could go on and on in detail, but the point is, I have had several women mentors and colleagues over these 5 decades that were instrumental in helping me to become the internal auditor and the professional and the leader that I've become.
I think that's a great story. And the word that comes to my mind too is another C, which is communication skills, right? So you've
Absolutely.
got to have that one as well. And it just reminds me of kind of my origin, working as the senior auditor at a U.S.-owned bank in Canada. I was 27 years old, didn't know anything from anything. I mean, I'd been at Deloitte for 4 years, but still didn't know much about it, internal auditing. And there were my manager and my director were both women. So the senior echelon was still male, but they were highly influential, I think, and I learned a lot from them. And when I was at Deloitte, mostly men as partners, but the junior partner was a woman, and she was probably mid 40s, and she was also a good role model. So even back then, there were still some role models. They just weren't the heads of audit, but I'm seeing more and more women as heads of audit, and they all show those C's that you talked about. So the competence and the confidence and the courage. And I think courage is coming up more and more. I write about courage a lot more these days than I ever used to. And I think though it applies across genders, is anyone who's in a leadership position, even if they don't have the title as an internal auditor, needs to have the courage to say, this is important, this needs to change, this is what it means to the business. But I also think they need the courage to do that internally, because I find a lot of clients come to me because they need change, they know they need change, but they need maybe that external influence to get them to make the change, to get everybody on board to make a change. So courage is, I think, a big word these days for our industry.
It is. And, you mentioned communication. I agree 100%. I kind of tie that into competence because if I think of the essential skills that it takes to be successful in our career field, in the internal audit field, communication skills often are recruited as highly as creative thinking or curiosity. Those vital skills that most people don't think of when they first think of what do you need to be able to do to be an internal auditor. Those come in ahead of being a good accountant or even being good at risk assessment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So there's hope for the future then, I think, for us in this whole gender and diversity that we're looking for in our profession. I think it's happening.
I think it is absolutely happening. I think, though, we can never take for granted. We don't want to be complacent with the progress that's being made. So I think it has to be something we have to be vigilant to watch for and
Absolutely.
to call out when we don't see it, like you were doing about panels a little while ago. Don't shrink away from pointing out where we can do better.
Well, and it's someone that we both know, and I reached out to him on LinkedIn. I said, can I make a comment about what I saw in your post? And he very graciously said yes. And I said, well, I don't see any women. And he's like, you're right, and we're going to fix it. So, it's great to have those relationships with everyone, even if we haven't met in person yet, to be
Right.
able to have those honest conversations, because it isn't a criticism in a negative way. It's like, how do we create more? How do we create better as we go forward?
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, if I could, switch topics a little bit and ask you about your new podcast series.
Speaking of risk and audit.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what your goals are for that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm doing it on behalf of and in partnership with Audit Board. When I got ready to step down from being a CEO at the IA, I'd been there 12 years. If you've done a job that long, you feel like, okay, I've done it all. I've been through this before. It ceases to be inspiring and really motivate you the way you should be if you're going to lead an organization like that from the front. And so I said at the time I wasn't going to retire. I think people assumed I was just because of my age. And well, I said I'm not sitting down. I am stepping down. So I joined forces with Audit Board because they are, in my opinion, making some of the most valuable and most important investments in the world in our profession. And so I joined forces with them, and I have served them in a number of capacities. And I did a video series for them for a while. I write regular blogs for them. I've just done a number of things for them, whatever they've asked, and then I'm often in there saying, hey, here's something else I can do. But with the popularity of podcasts, we said, let's take the little video vignette type things that I've been doing with around agents of change, and let's transform that into a formal, proper podcast. And so we did. And we kicked around, what do we call it? And I said, well, we're going to be speaking about risk and audit, so why don't we call it Speaking of Risk and Audit? And so that's the title. And we've had several guests already, and we'll be releasing a couple of new episodes every month. And I'm really excited about it because it's, as you know, because of this format, it's just so much more relaxed to be able to just sit and talk and interact and have a conversation. And I think people find that, and the reason podcasts have become so popular is it's a relaxing way to take in information and to feel like you're part of a conversation. So that's what we're doing. We've made great strides in it, and I'm excited about the upcoming episodes.
Awesome. I am too. I'm very much looking forward to it. So we're glad you're doing it. I know that. And you know, the fact that you have been blogging for so long too is a great way to communicate your thoughts and share your knowledge. But podcast is just taking it to the next level.
I
So
think I'm over 700 blogs now
wow.
since I started writing them at the beginning of my time at the IA. 4 books and
Yeah.
countless video productions. And what I'm doing is I hope I'm continuing to add some energy and some passion and some excitement to our profession. And when I cease to add value in that way, then it's going to be time for me to finally sit down, right?
Well, first I'll say in the show notes, we'll put links to all kinds of things that you're doing, your blog and your podcast and your all those things. But, just based on what you just said, I mean, I want to take it back to the beginning of our conversation, and it's 50 years of excellence, of guidance, of influencing, and of transformation. And I have to say that if I can speak for the community, to say we are grateful for everything that you give every single day to the community, because it adds so much value to us. It adds knowledge. It helps us think in ways that maybe we hadn't thought of before. So I appreciate that, and I'm very certain that pretty much everybody in the community would agree with me.
Thank you.
So I
The
would.
thing that I try to do, the thing I try and do, and it's been part of my approach for a long time, is I try and tell it like it is. And while you may see some of my some of the content that I create is out there championing the profession to the rest of the world, I'm just as likely to be talking tough love to members of the profession. Because if we kind of don't if we don't challenge ourselves, if we read our own press clippings and we believe we're infallible, that complacency, I think, is the most significant strategic threat to the future of internal audit. So I don't let that happen. So you will find my content runs the range. I'm a coach. I'm a critic. I'm doing all those things that I think the profession needs.
I think that's amazing. So you're a champion for the profession. I call myself the biggest cheerleader of the profession, but also not afraid to give some tough love every once in a while when it's needed. And so as you look back on the 50 years, can I ask you, in your opinion, what's changed the most since 1975? And how can auditors be future ready?
Well, I think the thing that's changed the most is that the profession has matured. Every profession matures, and even the world's oldest professions, accountants and the lawyers, they haven't stopped growing and evolving. We're a very young profession, and even if you trace the internal audit profession back to the American railroads, as some have done, that's still less than 200 years old. Put that up against the great professions of humanity, and we're toddlers, and you grow most rapidly when you're young, right? And so our profession has grown from just the time I joined it, where it was still by and large, the old term bean counters. We've been derisively called bean counters. We were by and large bean counters back in that era. They were starting to talk about doing operational audits, but you didn't find a lot of it. And so we've evolved from literally providing, assurance about financial reporting, all the way up to the idea that we can not only tell you what happened, but what is happening, and hopefully more and more what the potential things are that could happen in the future. It's that hindsight to insight to foresight journey. When I was first in internal audit, we were largely about hindsight, looking in the rear view mirror. But as we all know, that's not how you operate a vehicle. You don't spend your whole time just looking in the rear view mirror. You've got to be willing to look around and look ahead. And I think that's the story of the internal audit journey that I've been able to watch. We're still not comfortable providing foresight. A lot of us shy away from it. It's much easier to tell people what already happened. But the thing I worry the most about right now for internal audit is that we have to recognize we are in a seismic era of change, and I think AI has every bit of the potential to provide assurance on things that have already happened. It's a no-brainer. So we have to be much more comfortable. We have to be much more comfortable becoming the advisors and the change agents. Those are two of the books that I've written have been about. What skills does that take?
I think you're absolutely right. And when I look at the work that I do, so it's all about audit communication, and I work with a lot of clients on audit reporting, and they've got the hindsight down, right? The stretch where I have to pull a lot of them is actually having them put document insight, or make sure they find the opportunity to verbally have that discussion about insight.
Right.
The foresight.
The other thing that we're hearing a lot of conversation around is that internal audit needs to move from value protection to value creation.
Yes.
Well, value protection is largely rooted in hindsight. That I go back and tell you what you did wrong that didn't protect the value. Where the safe's locked, where the controls implemented. All of those things are value protection, but organizations don't exist just to protect value. They exist to create value. And so what are we going to do there? What's our role going to be in that? And if we can't define that, and if we can't embrace that, then we've got a tough go.
Absolutely, because someone else will define it, or someone else will take the role. So, but I'd love to get everyone right through to insight and then foresight. I think it's still a journey.
I agree.
All right. So looking back, what's one piece of advice you would give your 21-year-old self who is starting on the journey?
Well, it's really simple, and it's a piece of advice I give to college classes and to students and to young professionals who come to me all the time, and that is, be courageous enough to write your own story. Don't let someone else tell you what your journey needs to look like. I've told a story of how, I was being told when I got ready to graduate from college with my accounting degree, if you don't go into the big four today, if you don't, or it was big six or big eight then, but in other words, if you don't go into public accounting with this degree and get your CPA, you'll never really amount to anything. I was told that over and over and over, but I didn't have a passion for that. I didn't want to be in public accounting. And so I chose to write a different story. I picked up my briefcase and went off like a little geek to an internal audit department. But guess what? Years later, decades later, when I turned 50, I put on a backpack and I went to the Big Four. I joined PwC when I was 50 years old, and I became their national practice leader for internal audit advisory services. I think that's the kind of lesson that everyone should be taking, and that is, you can decide how you want to spend your career. Life is too short to have someone script it for you.
Absolutely. That resonates really with my journey as well. I did my CPA. I studied honors chartered accountancy in Canada, the School of Accountancy we had. And at 27, I went, this isn't what I want to be doing.
Yeah. I've told people, I said, I feel like I'm living my life like that movie character, Benjamin Button, because the older I get, the younger stuff that I'm doing. Here I am now 70, and I work for a tech startup company, helping them tackle the software as a service market around the world. So I don't think we should ever feel like we're trapped into someone else's script.
And final question, have you thought about what you want your legacy to be, or is it too soon?
Well, I mean, I hope that everyone always thinks about what do they want to be remembered for. I'd like for people to remember me as someone who gave to this profession, not just took from it, but gave back. And so I continue to do that. Even today, even while I do have some commercial activities that I'm part of, I volunteer as the chairman of the Audit Advisory Committee for UNICEF. I give to Nanjing Audit University in China. I'm their overseas dean, they call me. So I'm out there advocating on their behalf. I think that for me, it's about being able to give and give back. And you're never too old to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me on the Inspiring Women in podcast. It's really been a pleasure and an honor to have you join us. And I can't wait to find out what everyone's going to think about this episode, because I think they're going to love it.
Well, thanks, Tracy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inspiring Women in Audit podcast. We'd love for you to stay part of our growing community, so subscribe wherever you're listening. If you're enjoying our content on platforms like iTunes or Spotify, a quick 5-star rating from you would mean the world to us. It's a small action that supports our mission immensely. Don't forget to explore the show notes for various links and join our vibrant community on all our social media platforms. Your interaction and support play a crucial role in amplifying the voices of inspiring women in audit and spreading their inspiring stories even further. Thank you for being a part of our journey, and we'll catch you in the next episode of the Inspiring Women in Audit podcast.